Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having us here. I'm Omer, as said. I'm leading the product of Codux. So Codux is a new offering of Wix. It's a new IDE, new offering for developers. And we're here to show you what it can do today. But before we're going to start with Codux, I'm going to start with a quick introduction of who is here from our side. So as said, I'm Omer. I lead the product of Codux. Here with me today, coming from Tel Aviv, Israel. So it's 1:43 for us right now. Peter and Tom, they're going to help me showcase what we have in store for you today and answer questions at the end of the demo. So feel free to ask. A bit about our team. So we are a team in Wix that is very much focused on developer offering, very technical team, working on several things, open source projects, and Codux. We'll talk a bit about some of them and mostly about Codux. So let's see what kind of brought us here today. So components, we're all using them, right? It's a great way of working, right? The encapsulation, the isolation, reusability. I don't really need to emphasize why we're using components, but we can't really say that our work, our day-to-day lives are as streamlined or as easy or comfortable as they could be. So it starts with the fact that we're using text. We're using code to describe a visual thing. Now that's programming essentially. It doesn't really matter if you're writing an app or a website. We're usually describing this visual thing with text. Now, if we'll take a look at this line of code, do you imagine, can you think of how does this thing should look like visually? What does this represent? So it would look kind of like this, but it doesn't really make sense to kind of write this thing completely. We have this visual thing, and yet we have to write it, or we're using these visual tools, right, to create these more visual aspects of the thing. So we're using text a lot of the times to describe these a lot of visual aspects, and that can create a lot of hassle in our work. Now that a lot of the times means that we need to collaborate, we need to work with other team members. So it usually starts with a product manager creating their mocks, or the designer creating their design, that later on being handed off to development. Once developed, that being sent back to design to make sure that everything is aligned, or to QA to test it on different tools, different environments. That can be very complex. Now, when doing those handoffs, it means that we're usually ending up with those different sources of truths along the way. So each of those personas have their own environment, which in different points in time during this process can create their own source of truth. So this is how it would look for the designer side. From the developer side, more or less, QA testing things. That would be the product trying to create a spec. Yeah. So we have these different sources of truth that are created along the work that we do. And that can be very complex to manage. Every change that we're doing along this chain will somehow have to cascade into all of the other personas, into all of the other places in time. So we all have a sense of reality. This is where Codex comes in. So our vision, we're creating a consistent, predictable, and mostly, to be honest, enjoyable experience for editing visual aspects of components. We want to have one place for all of the team to collaborate together to work on the same source, which is the production environment. This is the real source, the code. We want to have quicker turnovers. We want to have less handoffs, which means less meetings, which means we can focus more on coding, on what we're here to do, to push our products forward. Yeah, so with that, please allow me to introduce Codex. So Codex is a visual IDE for React. Now, when you say IDE, we mean it. It is an integrated development environment. Has all of the capabilities that you know from your IDEs. You can write code freely, can manage Git or run scripts, things like that. But on top of that, we have our visual layer, our visual editing experience. So yeah, in Codex, the only thing that you edit is the code. The code is the only source of truth. We're working with the source code, with your React, with your TypeScript, with your style sheets. This is the only thing that, the only input or output. This means that there is no dirty or intermediate code. There's nothing that needs to be translated. There's no one language translated to another, something that should usually help with those visual experiences. We're just working with the code directly. In terms of complexity, so the environment and the components can be as simple or as complex as you need them to be. These are just React components in the end of the day. You can decide what do you want them to be. If you have components or environments that should be more complex, that work with wrappers or whatever, you can just create it in Codux. We're just the environment to do so. So it could be a very complex case or a very simple one. And you work locally, but you can deploy anywhere. So we're just working with files on your machine. So it's yours to take. You can do whatever you want. You can host it however and wherever you want it to be hosted. In terms of the supported stack, so we work, as I said, with React components written in TypeScript. We are relied on TypeScript to give a really good editing experience. And then the styling solutions that are supported in Codux are CSS and CSS modules, Sass and Sass modules, Stylable. Stylable is open source that was built in our team. It's a preprocessor for CSS. It's a really cool preprocessor. We use it in Codux solely, and it's used in Wix a lot. So those who are interested, you're welcome to check it out or ask some questions at the end. Tom here is very deep in all of the stylable concepts. And the upcoming support would be Tailwind. So ever since we launched our beta, we get a lot of requests to support Tailwind. So that would be the next in line. We are working on the best experience we can to edit projects with Tailwind. That's going to be out very soon. So enough with the talk. Let's start with the demo. So we're going to do a live demo here. So that's going to be fun. We are running it with Zoom in the background. So maybe, I don't know, let's see. But let's see what we're going to do. So for the sake of the demo, we have created this project. It's called Codux. It's a Git service provider, kind of like GitHub, all of the shiny features. It's a startup, so they have all of the developer collaboration, code reviews, PRs, all of that. But this startup is very much focused on connecting developers. Now, it is a made-up company. We've made it up for the sake of this demo. But it represents a real use case, something that I think that you can all connect to. So what we're going to do today in Codux would be this task. So our product design team have requested this redesign based on the connecting developers thing. We're going to redesign this main layout right here, and we're going to change the button over here. So we're going to do all of that right now in Codux. Okay. So I'm going to switch to Codux now, and what we're seeing here is our project picker. These are the recent React applications that I've been working on. Nothing too fancy about them, except for the fact that they're all React and TypeScript apps. So you probably have some of those. I'm going to run Codux. This is the one that we're going to work on. But while it runs, I'm going to open VS Code just for a second to take a look at how this project looks like. So this is Codux in VS Code. You can see that it has files that you may know, package.json, dependencies of this project. We have components here, source files, different components, style sheets, node modules. So all of these things, dependencies, libraries that are used, everything that you know from a React application. But if I'll switch back to Codux, we can see the same thing. This is the same project, that's just slightly more visual approach. So on the left, these are the components of Codux. These are the components of the project. They were scanned and detected here. While here in the center are the boards that I have created to render those components. So boards are just entry points to render components. You can render them and pass data to them to render them in different states if you need them to. So I'm going to jump into the app component just for a second because we want to take a look at how this project looks like. So this is Codux, but now we're looking at the actual React application. So what we see here is the rendering environment. We call it the stage. This is how we render your code. Now the stage can be used to render, and I can use it to explore. So everything that I will trigger as a user will be triggered right here. States are triggered. Everything that is user interaction based will be triggered when I'm in the state, but at the same time, I can use it to navigate, to drill in and choose different elements, different components that create this bigger app component. So you can see that it's made out of different elements that I can basically just select and edit. And that I can also do from this panel right here. So the elements tree on the left, a representation of the DOM structure and the source code, kind of a mix. You can see that it has different HTML elements, components from my project or from third-party libraries. And several cases also shows expressions, things that cause different behaviors, maps, conditions, things like that, that cause visual behavior. Now, what we wanted to do is in the top bar, right? So I'm going to go back to the home screen and I'm going to select the top bar. You can see the different boards, 3 boards that I've previously created for this component. So I'm just going to select one of them. And let's take a look at what we have here. So this is the top bar component, right? What we see here on the right are the props of this component. So this, just like the elements tree, is detected from the code structure. So we visually display the props here and give you a way to work with them, to pass different data. So everything that I will write here will be reflected on stage. You can see it right here. And I'll jump to the code just for a second to see that the boards are just files in your IDE, in your system. So you can work on them from code or from visual. It's all synced together. You can see that it's now rendered on stage and also here on the visual panel. It's all synced to your file, so you can do it from VS Code as well. But we're not here to mock the behavior with the board. We want to really edit the component itself. So I'm going to drill into the top bar component. This is what we're going to do most of the changes. Zoom in for a second. So what we wanted to do happens here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to relocate this connect button component. Now you can see this is the top bar component, pretty standard. I'm just going to select it and drag it to be placed at the top. So once it's moved, you can see that it's basically just changed the place it's located in the JSX structure. And I kind of have this thing where I want it to be. So I'm going to move to my next task. That would be to redesign the connect button itself. So I'm going to drill one scope in there as well. I'm going to select the button. This is what we want to edit. You can edit the button from this scope. I don't need to open it in isolation. And I'm going to do some styling changes. So on the right side, computed styles panel, kind of like what you know from DevTools. These are the styles that are applied on this element in this state. So it's a really good way for me to make sure that everything is built as it was meant to be built and as it was designed. But I can also use it not just to explore, but also to navigate, to go to where I want to edit things. So if I'm talking about the background color, clicking this edit button takes me to the third panel here, the style editing panel. Now I'm selected on this button selector. I'm going to open the code just so you can see. It's a SAS modules, so it's pretty standard. And what we're going to edit happens here in this selector. So I was already chosen on the button because I jumped from the computed styles. And what I want to do would be first thing to change the background. So let's see how it is now. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to open the background color picker. So I can basically use any value that I want, but I don't want to use a fixed value. So I'm going to use this variable. You can see here that I have access to all of my project variables. So I can just basically use them. If I select it, you can see that it is written here to the code, and I can see that it's rendered as I expected to render. So all of my project variables are available for me to use. Next would be to change the color of the text. I'll do the same thing here. I'm going to change the color, choose this variable as well. And now I see that I have the design kind of ready, right? So let's switch to the preview mode just for a second to see how it looks. You can see that it didn't really handle the hover state, right? So I'm going to do that now. Here in the states panel, I'm going to lock it on hover. You can see that once I lock it, I see that the element is showing me how it looks in this state. and I get this new selector here. Now, if I wouldn't have this button hover selector, I would be offered to create one. But what I want to do is to edit this one. So just like before, I'm going to change the background color. I'm going to use another variable from the project, and I'm going to unlock it just to see that it behaves as I want it to do. I do see that it behaves as I want it to look, so I'm just going to make sure that it all looks good in slightly more distance, looking good. I'm going to make sure that it looks good on those different boards that I have that represent this component. Just the same, looking good. Also here in the app. So I've kind of finished with my first task, right? I've completed the redesign. All I have left to do would be to share my changes. So I'm going to commit my changes. Now, this is very much based on your code conventions and the way you manage Git. So this is just working with Git. If you manage Git from the terminal, from your IDE, that's just fine. You can do it from Codex as well. I'm just going to write the commit message, and I'm going to push my changes. So once I do that, it gets pushed, and I can get a review from my team members. So that could be designers checking the design, developers checking the code, QA, product, whatever. So that would be the first thing that we wanted to do, right? We wanted to redesign this thing. I'm going to move back to my slides because we're going to do task number 2. So our product design team was very happy from the result, but we have a new task. We're going to create this new component. We don't just want to connect developers. We want to show how many connections do they have. So I'm going to create this new component from scratch. We're going to do it together. So back to Codex. In my home screen, I have this new component button. I'm going to create this component called connections. Now, this can be, you can see here that I can create a template. I can use a template. So this can be anything that you want. You can create your own templates with any code structure, any files that are used. You can do whatever you want. This is yours to decide, and you can basically do whatever you want. Any template can be done, files imported, variables, style sheets, whatever. If you want to create a fixed structure of working and reuse that in a more efficient way, that can be done. Now I'm going to drill into this connections component. Let's just take a look at what was created here in the code. So this is the TypeScript file of the component, connections component. You can see that I also have this style sheet right here. It's pretty basic. It's empty at the moment, but we're going to expand it as we go. And I have this board that was created to render my component. That's automatically created when I create a new component. So I'm going to start adding new elements, right? We're going to make this component a bit more as we wanted it to look. So I'm going to click this button right here. This is the add panel. We can use it to add elements into the structure. So we have HTML elements, components from my project or from third-party libraries. In this case, we're using Bootstrap, but it can be basically any library that you're using. But what I want to add is the icon component. So I'm just going to drag it into the structure. Now you can see that once I add it, I can see that it's added to the JSX structure. Of course, it's imported to the component, and now I can start working with it. So it doesn't really render automatically. And when I look here, I see that I have this error that says that I have a missing required property value. So this means that this component has this required property. Now, this is not a Codex thing. This is just the icon component asks me to pass some kind of a value. So once I pass the value that it expects, I see it renders immediately and I get rid of the error. Now, these props are just like before detected from this component. So each component will be showing its own props. Next thing, I'm going to add a text element, this span right here. I want it to represent the amount of connections each user has. Now, I can obviously change the text from here. I can lock it on this fixed value, but I don't want to do that. I actually want to expose it as a property. So this would still be something that I would do in code. So I'm going to use this button to jump back to VS Code. And I get this component that was just created here. And I'm going to create a new property here. Now, we do still believe that some actions should happen in code, right? Things that are more like logic code, things that should cause behavior. I'm exposing this property now. some things are still meant to be in code, and we're perfectly fine with that. But at the same time, a lot of the things that we're doing can be much nicer and make more sense when done visually. So I'm going to start with the count property. It's going to be a number, right? I'm going to add it here as well. And I'm going to replace this number with the same prop. So I'm going to hit save. Sorry. I'm going to hit save, and going back to Codex. Oh, wait, let's give it a default value so it can render something. And when I go back to Codex, I can see that now this code structure looks just like what I did now. So I have this count property. I can also see it here in the elements tree, and I see the 0 number. So we're good for now. Just going to fix the layout here. I'm going to use a basic flex layout, make sure that it's aligned to the center, and add this gap. It's all according to the design that I've received. And that's basically what I wanted to create. So this is the component that we wanted to have. We can just use it now. So I'm going to jump back to this scope, to the board of this component. And now we can see this count property that we've created now is added to the panel as well. So if I'm going to use some kind of a value, it will automatically render it. So I can mock those behaviors with that. So I'm going to go back to the top bar component. I want to add this new connections component that I've just created. So I will see it here. I'm just going to drag it to where I want it to be. That will be right here. And looks good, right? Looks like it's where I want it to be, but it is showing me the default value. So what I'll have to do now would be to connect it to the interface that comes from this top bar component or from the application or whatever. So I'm going to click here, edit code. It will take me to the place that I want to edit. Here, I'm going to connect it to the user interface, and I'm going to use the followers because this is how it's used here. And once I connect it to the data that comes from this wrapping component or from the context that is passed from your app or however you manage data in your application, I will immediately see the render happens here, looking good. And I'll just take a look here again in my boards that I've previously created, again, looking good. In my app, same here. You can see here that it's connected to the app data. So the number is different, but it's just showing me the number. So basically that was the second task I wanted to do. So all I have left to do now would be to commit my changes again. So I will call it new connections component. Obviously we have better commit messages when it's real, but I'm not going to waste your time on that. I'm going to commit and push my changes. So again, my team members will get it to review with the way they're used to manage Git flows. Yeah, and that's that. So that was the second part of the demo. So now coming back to Codex, we're out, we're in beta. It's all working free, so you can use it your own. You can just download it, play around. You can load your own projects. You can create new React applications in Codex and use our visual experience to work with React. And we'll be very happy to hear if you have any questions. No? Are you shy, or it was very clear, or?
Come on, guys. Hi, I have a question.
Yeah.
What was the inception of the idea? I guess, like, what was it, something that you felt was missing, or did it solve a problem that you had?
I guess both would be the right answer. We use it, first of all, like, let's start with that. So we use Codux for all of our UI tasks, and it really improved the way we work, between designers, developers, products, really improve the collaborative aspect. But when talking about the dev team, and Peter and Tom, you can talk for yourself, but felt like a lot of the actions that were done on like old school ways are now done in Codux more efficiently. You're just connected from the visual to the code, like the rendering of your components, and every part of the rendering of your components is connected to the source. So any change that you're trying to do, any addition that you're trying to make, you have all of your assets in one place. You have code, rendering, in this one environment. So that really improved the way we work, not only as a team, but even when we're doing tasks. So the vision is to bring this one environment to all of the teams. And for us, it works really well. And we now, in the last, I guess, 2 months or like a month and a half, we see more and more teams starting to use it. And it's really exciting times for us.
I can also provide some additional context, maybe. Only
Uh-oh. Tom, if you're talking, we can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Tom.
I had a feeling that they can't hear you because
Good talk. Good talk.
I wasn't sure if it's me or not.
okay. Sorry about that. Got me now?
Yeah, much
Yes.
better.
Sorry. So yeah, if I'm taking a slightly more generic or general view of the thing, so Wix has kind of made itself famous and made it spread with crafting visual experiences on the web, right? Its most famous solution is the WYSIWYG HTML editor that lots of people use for their projects, for their businesses, for whatever. So you have a lot of know-how on that side of things. We know how to craft interactive experiences, editing experiences within the browser, within the toolings that we create. And we saw that when it comes to professional audiences, developers such as yourselves, it's not that the visual tools are for simple users. We can benefit from them just as much and find a lot of really tedious or areas that we can really improve and streamline our work processes simply by being more connected to the real thing, to how it looks, to how it presents itself, to how it behaves in an interactive environment in the browser, instead of kind of mocking all of those behaviors in various tools and then finding the gaps back and forth in this kind of ping pong rhythm between different stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. I did have another question though.
Please.
In terms of errors, you got that error where you didn't pass a prop correctly, and it was really subtle. I kind of like my errors to be super noisy. Is there any higher up chain? Like if I'm looking at a project from the top level and one of my components nested down into the project has a problem with it, is there an easy way for me to see that from the top?
So Omer showed the log feature, maybe.
Oh, yeah, it's not going to be in this. Yes, I'm going to go back to connections. I guess I can just like
Create an error, syntax
Yeah.
error, even like, type error, something.
yeah, you will need the code for that.
Right. So if I'm giving it some sort of syntax error, type error, something that happened during the build process that it didn't expect and couldn't handle, we're gonna try to encapsulate that error in terms of the rendering, in terms of the view. But you are going to get the actual error itself here with its stack and everything. So you could look at it on the side of runtime errors or exceptions that get thrown while the code is actually running and not necessarily during build or compilation. We still have some improvements to do in how we expose them.
I think that's great. I'd missed that log panel before. Yeah. I just thought it was that tiny little red circle next to the attribute. And I'm like, that seems pretty quiet.
I guess it depends on the error, right? So we always try to preserve and give you still like the editing experience, even if things like blow up. So you still have like Codux running, and that was a lot of our effort was on that, like to make sure that you can keep editing things. We are trying to keep whatever we can render still rendered, so you can see what's breaking for you, and it depends on the error. So Some things that are like they're not necessarily gonna blow up, but we do give you the indication. In these cases, it's more of like in your face, but we'd appreciate any feedback in those areas.